The voice of God, the voice of Zoom. So nobody knows exactly how you're supposed to greet each other on Yom Kippur. It feels funny to say Good Yontif. But anyway, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
And thank you for coming to join me today. I think there's still room for everyone to join us. So I hope that if you find this 50% as interesting as I do, I think you'll be quite interested in the session today. At least I hope so. Because we're going to take a very big picture look at what I think fits the term, the ethos of the High Holy Days, which is set, in my mind now, on a part of the Mishnah, which is the first part of the Talmud. The Talmud consists of two parts. The first part is from the earlier generations of the rabbis, from about 200 BCE to 200 of the Common Era, that 400-year period. And when their stuff was put together, it's called the Mishnah. The Gemara, the second part, are the later rabbis essentially commenting and debating the Mishnah. We're going to be looking at the Mishnah. And a section of the Mishnah, the translation is the best word I know of is tractate, is called a Masechet. So we're going to be looking at Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Before I get to that, what I want to say is I want to draw our attention to our first text, Psalm 8:4. By the way, we're going to really need those of you who are zooming in to our session to participate. Eileen is going to be very good about letting me know if you have a thought to share, because we're a small group today, so we could use everybody's spiritual and intellectual power. So I looked at this verse, entirely new. It's a very well-known verse, but it struck me once I knew where I was going with this, and I'll explain that in a minute. I saw this in a whole different light. So you see in Psalm 8, verse 4, the verse says, Ma'adam v'teda ehu. What are we? What is Adam? What is the human being that you are mindful of us? What are we? Now, what does that sound like to you? What is that? What kind of feeling about being a human does that convey? Just those words. Oh my, you're thinking about God. My brother likes to say the creator of zebras and hippopotamuses. And you say to yourself, Madam, what are we? That you even pay any attention to us? What does that evoke?
Insignificance.
Insignificance, lowliness, humility. We're nothing. I am nothing before you, right? But now look at the next two verses, verses 5 through 7. You have made us little less than divine and adorned us with glory and majesty. You have made us master over your handiwork. Everything you created, we're the boss of it. Laying the world at our feet. So now how does that sound? I thought you were gonna... Pardon me?
Significant.
Okay, we've gone from insignificant to now all of a sudden significant. Do one or other of these speak to you? I think that especially when you think about, doing this on Yom Kippur, when we're supposed to really, dive into who we are and what we're all about, and our sense of what it means for us to be alive in our lives. Any thoughts about how do you feel on this day? How does this verse make you feel?
It seems that like the first verse is kind of self-deprecating then. If we're so amazing from this 5 through 7, why did we ask that question? Are we not confident in?
You mean the Madam, why, what are we?
Yeah, what are we, I'm seeing them together, like,
Yeah,
so if you at first ask that and you say, oh, but you made us little less than divine, you adorned us with glory and majesty, why would you ask that question?
beautiful. So give me the midrash. You're the rabbi now. Why would you put those two together?
Setting up the midrash, setting up the discussion.
Because if both are true, then you have something to wrestle with.
Okay,
Namely, how is it possible that both could be true?
okay.
And how do I act as a result of that?
And what does it mean that both of them are true?
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, now, as I said, the rabbis talk about the high holy days in two major sections. I already mentioned one is called Rosh Hashanah. The other one is called Yoma, which means reference to Yom Kippur. And so they discuss all these laws and the rituals. In Rosh Hashanah, we get a glimpse of how the high holy days are designed as a way of bringing these two ideas that are in the Psalms together, celebrating being human and a time to recognize we submit to God, our humility, our low status, our humbleness, I think. Now, the focus of the Masechet, Rosh Hashanah, of the Mishnahs, are twofold. One, proclaiming the new month. Because remember, it's technically it's a luni-solar calendar. It's based on the phases of the month of the moon, but it's brought in alignment with the solar calendar. So you have to proclaim the new month before you know when Rosh Hashanah is. Before you know where Yom Kippur is, Sukkot, Simchat Torah. And then the other thing that's covered in this Masechet, this tractate, is all the stuff about blowing the shofar. So proclaiming the new month and blowing the shofar. So what we're going to explore is how these mitzvot, proclaiming new month, blowing the shofar, help us to learn how to live in tension between these two ideas of the loftiness of what it means to be a human being, we're little less than angels, and beings who must submit to God. Now, full disclosure, B'Shem Omro, as we say, in the name of the one who you learned this from, the real chidush, the real insight into what I'm presenting today is based on a teaching from one of my favorite teachers at the Hartman Institute, Micha Goodman. Google him, go to the Hartman site, look at his videos. He's unbelievable. He was born and raised in Israel, but he had American parents, so his English is outstanding. Far better than any of our Hebrew. And he took an unusual approach. The traditional way of studying this kind of text is that you look at a Mishnah, it's divided into like paragraphs almost. You look at a Mishnah, and you go deep into it, deep dive. What he did was he took a look at the whole Masechet and saw how it worked, how it fit together. So the first two chapters are about proclaiming the new moon, sanctifying the new moon, Kiddush HaChodesh. The second two chapters are all about the shofar. What's a kosher shofar? What are the blasts of the shofar, etc. So you have basically two topics. The whole project entailed with declaring the new month and declaring Tekiah, the blasting of the shofar, which is clearly done in order to proclaim the sovereignty of God. You blow the shofar to proclaim that God is king. So you have two declarations. there's a new month, and God is king. So we're gonna spend most of the time, because it's amazing, looking at the first two chapters on the proclaiming of the new month. And it raises questions about time. How do we measure time? How do we experience time? How do you build a Jewish calendar? So this Masechet, the Rosh Hashanah, begins with how the new month is proclaimed, like I said, so you know how to celebrate, when to celebrate the holidays. So generally, we observe time, we experience time by observing natural phenomena, the birth of the new moon. So when you see that big moon face, what phase of the moon is that?
Full.
That's the full moon. And what point in the month is it?
Middle.
I always used to think that. It's the middle. Because it waxes and wanes, it gets bigger and it gets smaller. So in the middle of the month, it's the full big face of the moon. Then it shrinks. The moon will get smaller and smaller until it essentially disappears. And it disappears right before the new moon comes out. So there's this brief time where it looks like the old moon has died and disappeared, there's no moon, and then it's reborn. The moon is born again. You could see how this thinking got into certain theologies about the birth, death, and rebirth of gods. So that moment, when the moon dies and then reappears as the new moon, that's what they're capturing and declaring. But it's pretty complex. Does anybody know how many days there are in a lunar month?
28, right?
1,
Month.
It's 28.
Here's what I understand. 29 days, 12 hours, and about 43 minutes on average, which is an awkward amount of time. So what we do is we balance it. We have some days, some months that are 29 days. This is a Jewish calendar. Some days that are 30. How do we decide which month gets 29 and which months get 30? This is all before it was calculated completely scientifically or mathematically. It was up to the rabbis. The rabbis determined it. They decide by spotting when the moon is born, and they declare it born. Now, here's what captures the imagination. This process of observing and proclaiming the new month, the rabbis wanted it to be a project of the whole Jewish people. They wanted to involve everyone. And so we're going to try to understand eventually why that would be. Why was that important to them? So the Mishnah tells how people all over Israel could be observers of the moon that night. When it disappears, you wait a little bit till it's reborn, and then the idea is you run to Jerusalem. And you go to the court, the rabbinical court, the Beit Din, and you give testimony of what you saw. And if you get the right number of witnesses, the testimony is accepted. The rabbis declare, it says like this, Rosh Beit Din Omer Mikudash, the head of the Beit Din, of the rabbinical court, proclaims Mukdash, it is sanctified. And then all the people respond, Mukdash, Mukdash, sanctified, sanctified. So that's the process that turns observing the new moon into a national event involving everyone. Now, the question is, how do you get people to participate? How do you get people to want to schlep to Jerusalem to give their testimony? Well, they knew what she knows very well, which we observe religiously, if you should pardon the expression, here at Beth Israel, except on Yom Kippur, except at the end of the day. You want people to come, you give them food. And that's what the rabbis did. They threw a party. So they have a big feast in Jerusalem, and you go there because you've seen the moon. So you go to Jerusalem and you stand in line and you get to hang out with people from all over, and you get a big feast. Even if the first two people to testify are accepted, you still listen to every single witness. Why would you want to do that? Because if people bothered to come there, and after 20 minutes you said, okay, go home, they would lose the incentive to come. So they would listen to every witness, no matter how many showed up. There has to be a reason why this is so important to the rabbis. They didn't have to be this way. By then, they had some idea of how the moon worked. There could have been professional observers who would testify, but the rabbis didn't want that. They wanted everyone to participate. So why was this important to the rabbis? There's two different possibilities, somewhat related, but two possibilities based on one midrash. One way of looking at the midrash is this. It's a reference, and we're going to look at it later. It's a reference to when the Israelites are on their journey, and they have a war with the Amalekites. Moses goes up to like a hill, and he raises his hands up. And when he raises his hands, the Jews win the battle. And he got tired and had to lower his arms. The Amalekites prevailed. So the Mishnah asks, essentially, what was it magic? Was it something about Moses' hands? No. So it's that while he raises his hands, he induces people to look at him, and he's going like this. So they follow his hands, and then they look to the heavens, the skies above. And when the Israelites look up at the sky, they're inspired by God. Now, Micha's interpretation of this one way of looking at it, is to say the rabbis wanted the Jews to be the kind of people who would keep their heads up, that would look up. And this is along the lines of that first interpretation. They would feel empowered, inspired. We can do this. A very ennobling and empowering idea of what it meant for them to follow his hands and look to the heavens. Israel will be a people that looks up and will be inspired by their partnership with God to do great things in the world. Now we're going to see how this process is further discussed in the Masechet when certain problems are raised. For example, what do you do if the new moon is seen on Shabbat? I learned not to try to fight it. Why is this an issue? If it's on Shabbat, what's the issue?
Because you can't travel?
You couldn't travel beyond a certain distance. So if you're outside of Jerusalem, you're limited about how far you can travel. So if you saw the new moon, you'd have to violate Shabbat. So let's look at our text of Mishnah. We're in chapter 1, Mishnah 4. And you'll see that it says there, by the way, this is from Sepharia. And I know it's been explained, but what you see in bold is the actual Talmudic, Mishnaic text You can see if you try putting that together, how cryptic the language is. You have to really fill in a lot. The rest of it, I think, is Steinsaltz, the great commentator, kind of filling it in and making it easier to read. So he says, it says here, for 2 months, there are 2 months where witnesses who saw the new moon desecrate Shabbat. Should that be necessary in order for them to offer testimony before the court? And it makes sense when this would be. Nisan, because that will establish Tishri. And after that, you have all of those festivals in the fall, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot. Yeah. And when the temple was, these months, the 2 months were Nisan and Tishri. Tishri is when the fall festivals are set. Nisan, Passover, Shavuot, those holidays, sorry. Those were the days where messengers are sent out to Syria, out far away. That is, these months, the dates of the 2 major festivals are set. We've already said that. And when the temple was standing, so this is when you had this court that we're talking about, the witnesses desecrated Shabbat for the fixing of the new moon of all the months, due to the imperative of fixing the proper offering of the new moon at the correct time. So, to witness the sanctity and proclamation of the Chodesh, you can violate this prohibition of space, which requires you to stay within your border. I know how it's defined with a wire, you know about the Eruv? The Jews finally put one up in La Jolla and drove the anti-Semites crazy. But there's one up in La Jolla now. And that means that an observant Jew can walk anywhere within that wire, and it is actually a thing up there. And it closes it, it makes it as if it's not a public domain. It's private space, like in your home. You can walk around in your home carrying stuff. Now, the next Mishnah, Mishnah 5, is even more surprising. We've already said you can break Shabbat. You know how serious the rabbis are about Shabbat, but you break Shabbat in order to go testify. Then in Mishnah 5, whether the new moon was seen clearly by everyone or whether it was not clearly seen, one may desecrate Shabbat in order to go testify. So you're out somewhere, let's say in Lod, and it's a clear night, and I see this new moon phenomenon. Can I assume that everyone has seen it, including people in Jerusalem? So do I need to violate Shabbat to testify in this case? It's not dependent on me, probably. But the rabbis say, even though it's not dependent on you, you still do it. You violate Shabbat to go to Jerusalem, even if your testimony is likely to not be necessary. And it even says, what if you're uncertain about what you saw? And I don't know about you, but what was that latest astronomical phenomenon we were supposed to go look at 3 a.m. or something? What was it?
The meteor shower?
Yeah, right. You got a few clouds, you can't see it, or even if you want to look at the moon, a lot of times, especially where we live, the closer to the coast you get, it's very difficult. So what if it's cloudy and you got a glimpse of the moon, but you got a glimpse and you saw it, disappear, and then it looks like it came back? You may be the only one who saw it. So obviously, it's Shabbat, you still go to Jerusalem and violate the Shabbat. It's up to me. I'm going to save, the new month. So even if you have some doubt about your testimony or the necessity of your testimony, you break Shabbat. And now, Mishnah 9. Why don't I have somebody read this? Somebody want to read it real loud and clear and good?
Mishnah
Go
9.
ahead, Jerome. Yeah, Mishnah 9.
With regard to one who saw the new moon but is unable to go to Jerusalem by foot because he is sick or has difficulty walking, others may bring him on a donkey or even in a bed, even on Shabbat if necessary. And if the witnesses are concerned that bandits may be lying in wait for them along the road, they may take clubs or other weapons in their hands, even on Shabbat. This is as it is stated. These are the festivals of the Lord, sacred gatherings, which you shall declare in their seasons. Leviticus 23:4. This teaches that in all cases, the festivals must be fixed at their proper times, even if it entails the transgression of Torah prohibitions.
So if you saw it, and it's Shabbat, and you need something a cane, something that you normally wouldn't be able to carry, because it would be a violation of Shabbat, or you need people who didn't witness it, but they'll help you. You and they violate Shabbat in order to go to Jerusalem. So these broad violations of Shabbat are permitted. So this is pretty stunning. Even if there's uncertainty that your testimony is needed, not only are you supposed to violate Shabbat, but anybody who you need to have help you get to Jerusalem can violate Shabbat. So the rabbis are setting up a hierarchy. The sanctity of the month has more weight than the sanctity of Shabbat.
Wow.
So this means that the Mishnah will sacrifice, what does this mean? That they'll sacrifice Shabbat to make room for declaring the new month. It reveals that there's something very important about sanctifying the new month to the rabbis, so much so that they're willing to sacrifice Shabbat. So now we'll go to chapter 2 to explore this idea more. Okay, somebody want to start reading, then I'm going to interrupt you and we'll skip a part of it. Go ahead.
Rabbi Gamliel had a diagram of the different forms of the moon drawn on a tablet that hung on the wall of his attic, which he would show to the laymen who came to testify about the new moon, but were unable to describe adequately what they had seen. And he would say to them, did you see a form like this or like this?
Okay, let's stop there. So this was how Rabban Gamliel would do it. And by the way, this was one of the first Mishnahs, rabbinic texts I ever studied. I still remember studying this my first year of rabbinical school in Jerusalem. And we got such a kick out of thinking about this rabbi, and we draw an image of a rabbi of the first century, what he looked like. And he's got this little study, and he's got a chart in the moon. And he's got some simple Jews, a farmer from Lod or something. Did it look like this? Like that or like that, By the way, there's a very clever way of knowing when you see just a sliver of the moon, if it's the old or the new. You know what it is?
Oh, well, one is very concave. That's the new moon. It looks like a fingernail clipping.
It looks like the letter Resh,
Okay.
or Rosh, as opposed to the other way. So it looks like that, Rosh, yeah.
Wait, for real?
Yeah,
So the new moon is always on the right?
like that side of it when you're looking at it. So that's
I
That's-
never
is it-
knew that.
you're like, you're not believing it?
No, I believe it. I had never thought of it. I had to see the picture in my mind.
Yeah, I thought you were reviewing all the new months you've ever seen, new moons.
Okay.
So this is how he would do it. So if they would come in there, maybe they were still finishing their sandwiches or something from outside. And this I think of him as a kindly old guy. Did it look like this? Did it look like that? Now we're going to skip a few lines where they bring up when there's a disagreement among the rabbis about the reliability of what the witnesses saw. But there are two stories. So let's just go to the second one. So somebody pick up where it says, and there was another incident.
Is that under here?
Yeah.
About halfway down, almost halfway down.
Hold on. I want to just make sure I have it for the people at home. And there we go.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
And there was another incident in which the two witnesses came and said, we saw the new moon at its anticipated time, i.e. on the night of the 13th day of the previous month. However, on the following night, i.e. the start of the 31st, which is often the detriment of a full 30-day month, it was not seen. Nevertheless, Rabban Gamaliel accepted her testimony and established the new moon on the 13th day. 30th day, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas disagreed and said, there are false witnesses. How can witnesses testify that a woman gave birth and the next day her belly is between her teeth? I.e., that she is obviously still pregnant. If the new moon was already visible at an anticipated time, how could it not be seen a day later? Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, I see the logic of your statement. The new moon must be established a day later.
So, again, we see how he investigates, and did it look like this or this? So Gamaliel basically understood astronomy, and he used those images to determine the accuracy of the testimony. But now we have a situation where one rabbi thinks the witnesses didn't really see the new moon, and another one has proclaimed it, and he's the head of the Beit Din, has accepted their testimony. So now you wonder, when does the month begin? You have a choice. Because according to observation of nature, astronomy, it was wrong testimony. So the Beit Din knows that Rabbi Joshua is correct. According to objective nature, it was not the new month. The new moon was not born yet, but the Beit Din had declared it born. So Joshua is faced with a problem. Do I start celebrating Rosh Chodesh when, according to nature's calendar, it's the new month? Or do I start observing the new month when the Beit Din has declared the new month beginning? So what is going to be decisive? Do we observe the natural new month or the new month declared by the Beit Din? In other words, who decides, nature or people? This is Rabbi Joshua's problem. And now let's go to number 9. Marcia, did you want to read?
Is that here upon hearing the rabbi?
Wait,
Yes.
where was that again?
At the bottom of the same
At the
page.
very bottom, okay, upon hearing that Rabbi Yehoshua had challenged his ruling, Rabban, how do you pronounce it?
Gamaliel.
Gamaliel sent a message to him. I decree against you that you must appear before me with your staff and with your money on the day on which Yom Kippur occurs, according to your calculation. According to my calculation, that day is the 11th of Tishri, the day after Yom Kippur.
So he's tackling this controversy head on. He sent a message to Rabbi Joshua. You think that Yom Kippur is next Monday? I say it's not. I order you to break what you think is Yom Kippur and come appear before me.
Why does he talk about staff and money?
Because you're really breaking Yom Kippur if you're carrying stuff and money.
Especially money.
You're going to make it very clear that you are breaking your Yom Kippur because I told you to. So maybe he's just this egomaniac and he's demanding, dare I say it, loyalty. Okay, well, let's go further. Marcia, you want to continue reading?
Sure. Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yehoshua, distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. In an attempt to console him, Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yehoshua,
Just so you understand, as she reads it, he's going to give him a way of understanding why he should submit to Gamliel. He's going to do a little drosh on a verse to prove that he has to follow what Gamliel has said. Go ahead.
I can learn from a verse that everything that Rabban Gamliel did in sanctifying the month is done, i.e., it is valid. As it is stated, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations, which you shall proclaim in their season. Leviticus 23, verse 4. This verse indicates that whether you have proclaimed them at their proper time, or whether you have declared them not at their proper time, I have only these festivals as established by the representatives of the Jewish people. Rabbi Yehoshua then came to Rabbi
Okay, I
Berk.
wanted to, here the mission is continuing with how another rabbi convinces Rabbi Joshua that he has to accept Gamliel's ruling. Let's skip that and go down to where it says, when he's convinced, he took his staff and his money in his hand.
Yeah, he took his staff and his money in his hand and went to Yavne, to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred according to his own calculation. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on his head. He said to him, "Come in peace, my teacher and my student. You are my teacher in wisdom, as Rabbi Joshua was wiser than anyone else in his generation. And you are my student, as you accepted my authority, despite your disagreement."
Any reactions to this?
Just want to make something more clear. It's not that he just want to have authority, he accept the witnesses. Rabban Gamliel, he accepted the witnesses, and that's what he think he should do. And it's not just because he said so, it's because the witness said so.
That's right. He didn't say it willy-nilly. He said he accepted what they had seen. I don't think it's really clear what was the break? In other words, what made him accept this testimony, which was clearly not accurate? But in a way, it's beside the point. Or it's a necessary setup to make a point. But you're right, he has based it on the testimony. And not only is it the witnesses, but you'll notice it said, he's the head of the main Sanhedrin. He's like the Supreme Court justice. He's the main man. Anything else?
I'm gonna pause for just a quick second to check in with our people online, because I've been screen sharing for a while. If anyone online had a share, please just let us know, and I'll put the screen share back up.
Thank you. So the Beit Din does not report that a new moon has come. It decides when a new moon has come. We're not just observers of reality. Sometimes we are the creators of reality. Rabbi Joshua accepts this radical idea, and he violated objective time, the time that nature had determined when Yom Kippur really was, goes to Gamliel as if to say, Yom Kippur is not defined by nature. It's defined by human action, human decision.
It reminds me of the story of the argument in the Sanhedrin in which God proclaims and the Sanhedrin says, "Get out of here, this is for us to decide."
It's exactly a very good point, a very good point. Yeah. I spoke about that second day Rosh Hashanah. Because the interesting thing is that after you get this great situation where God is reported to have laughed
Yeah.
Because, here God has sent miracles to show that Rabbi Eliezer was correct. And the rabbis basically say, look, you stay out of this. You have nothing to do with this. They're saying that to God. That's in your sacred literature.
Yeah.
Our sacred literature. The rabbi is saying, butt out. This is up to us. But then the story goes on. And I'm grateful to Rabbi Daniel Gordis for pointing this out, because he said all rabbis stop right there, which I always did. You go on, and the rabbis are so angry with Eliezer and this invoking of miracles and all that stuff, they cancel him. They annul every decision he ever made. And that's what ticked God off. And God destroys a third of the wheat, a third of the barley, devastation. And Rabbi Gordis's conclusion was, kick God out of the yeshiva, and God laughs. Treat another human being the way they treated Rabbi Eliezer, and that evokes God's anger. So you also find an echo there. The honor and dignity of a human being is maybe even more important to God than God's own honor and dignity. So Gamliel, yeah, Marcia.
So that sort of refers back to Psalm chapter 8, verses 5 through 7, where, we're only a little less than divine and we're full of glory and majesty. So basically, that's what the Sanhedrin is saying.
Yes.
We're the boss.
Yes, exactly. At least this half of the Mishnah. So Gamliel doesn't go, ha, 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 ha. Gamliel stands up and kisses him and calls him my teacher and my student. What do you think he meant by that? So Micah's interpretation is this. We all knew you were right. I learned from you something. Everyone knows you're right. But you're my student. You accepted my authority. So it's not about who's right. It's about who decides.
Rabbi, wasn't Gamliel Hillel's grandson?
I think so.
I think so, but
Related. There are a couple of generations there, it's not just grandson. I think it's the sixth generation.
it wasn't his father. It was his.
It's kind of quite complicated, there's a couple of Gamliels and.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
okay.
remember exactly. Sorry. So the power to sanctify time, when it's about the month, declaring the month, that's human power. But Shabbat is a different system. Shabbat, and the rabbis talk about this in another place in the Talmud, that was created by God. It's part of creation. Yom Kippur is a time the Beit Din designates when it is. So you have two systems, the weekly and the monthly. The weekly system, Shabbat, is decided by God. The monthly is decided by people. This is a very radical proclamation of the rabbis. It's their way of saying, we're not controlled by time. We control time. Now, the rabbis operate in a world where you had the Greek idea of fate. You had no control over time. And there's these Greek ideas that are just a little too complicated for this session, which means they're too complicated for me to understand. But it has to do with, like, for example, you think about Friday the 13th. If you believe that bad things are going to happen on Friday the 13th, you're controlled by time. There's a power about that day that bad things are going to happen, as opposed to like, oh, bummers just happened and it happened to be that day. That's a whole concept that the Greeks had, that every single day had that kind of power. And the rabbis are rejecting that. The one time that God controls is Shabbat, but if there's a clash with Shabbat between divine and human time, we're not controlled by the divine time. So it's like a declaration of sovereignty of human beings over time. And as you beautifully noticed, very fitting with that second half of the Psalms that we looked at earlier. Yeah, Marcia.
So is that why, I think it's in Deuteronomy that astrologers and soothsayers are not allowed, or, you know, there's a prohibition on astrologers. Is that why? Because astrology is sort of like.
Wow, that's beautiful. That may very well be true. Yeah, that's a great insight. What I always was struck by is that the Torah never says they're full of nonsense. They just say, don't go consult them. Don't look into that. But I think that's a great point. Because that's a way of saying, I once had a wedding couple that asked me to marry them not only at a certain date and of course place, and not only at like 4 o'clock, but they wanted the pronouncement at 4:12 or something like 4:12. They had a precise moment, and it was based on their consulting an astrologist of when there was a perfect alignment for the two of them to be married. I don't remember how close I got to that, by the way. I tried not to worry about it.
How did the marriage last? It was okay?
Now, at this point, this is a funny thing that has to do with artificial intelligence. Micah Goodman cited an incredible midrash, and he even gave the citation for it. I had a go-around with artificial intelligence. I was doing Bard, and I said, I have this midrash that goes something like this, and I think it's in Masechet Nedarim. And it goes something like this, and Bard went, bring, bring. Yep, here it is. So I went to look there, and I said, and I went back. I said, I'm sorry, that's not the right source. Can you check again? Oh, you're right, that's not it. It's here. I'm telling you, it did this 9 times.
Sure.
You cannot trust these things. I want to cite this midrash because it's so beautiful, but I could not find it. I looked and I looked and I looked. But it's imagining the divine court, which we evoke with Unatana Tokef, where everybody passes before God like a shepherd with a staff, you know. So Rosh Hashanah is about to come. God starts to convene the divine court. And he tells the ministering angels, get the books of life and death out. We're going to open up court and get ready for judgment. And then the angels kind of look down on earth and they go, well, wait a minute, God, the Jews aren't in synagogue. And the reason they weren't in synagogue is that they had made a miscalculation about when the new month was. So according to the Jews, Rosh Hashanah was the next day. So what do you think God did?
Delayed a day.
He said, okay, put the books away, we'll open court tomorrow. We define time for God. So this is this radical declaration of human independence and power, the liberation of people from God's control. But now we're going to glimpse, and you'll see I saved just a few minutes for the second half because it can be summarized pretty quickly. This is about the shofar, and it's going to explain a lot of the mitzvahs having to do with shofar. It says that the mitzvah is hearing the shofar, not blowing the shofar. So already you have human beings in a passive thing. We're supposed to hear it. And then it goes and adds a layer, not just hearing it, but you have to do so with this rabbinic term that we use a lot of times we don't even translate it because it's difficult. Kavanah, you've heard it. You have to have the right kavanah. Some kind of intention or focus. You can't be, I was gonna say eating a sandwich, but on Yom Kippur you wouldn't be, but on Rosh Hashanah you could theoretically. You know, you're not supposed to be doing, you're supposed to really focus on the sounds. But the Mishnah goes deeper than that. And now we're gonna come back to that midrash about the hands of Moses. So you have to establish this intention, they say kiven et libo, kiven kavanah, direct your heart. You're really paying attention. And now the hands of Moses, who would like to read incidental to the discussion? Remember, that's Steinsaltz, not the actual.
We don't have it, I don't think.
We have this Mishnah.
Oh, I'm sorry, there it is, okay.
3:8. You thought you were all right?
Incidental to the discussion of the required intent when sounding the shofar, the Mishnah cites the verse, "And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed." Exodus 17:11. It may be asked, did the hands of Moses make war when he raised them, or break war when he lowered them? Rather, the verse comes to tell you that as long as the Jewish people turned their eyes upward and subjected their hearts to their Father in heaven, they prevailed. But if not, they fell.
Okay. So if you think that Moses had any kind of power to create this victory, then you're assuming human beings have power. Almost like magic. It's about us. We can do it. But the rabbis are saying no. It's not about Moses' hands. It's about Jews. It's not about Jews being a people that looks to the sky and becomes ennobled. It's about realizing God has the power. They looked at his hands and then to the sky above. And it's not to express how powerful he was, but rather God was in control. And so the shofar is declaring God is king. We don't like the word, slaves. We submit to God. We don't have power. The whole kavanah, the intent of listening really to the shofar, is surrendering to God, accepting God's kingdom. God is powerful, we are not. We are God's servants. So listening to the shofar means surrendering your power, feeling powerless at that moment, and realizing God is in control. Any reactions to that?
I'm confused.
Huh?
I'm confused.
What's confusing?
So I'm confused about the two stories or the text that we read. They're kind of like contradictory to each other.
How do we put it together?
Yeah. Because on the one hand,
That's
we have
called
the
good
power,
confusion.
and God.
That's not like confusion, Rabbi, I didn't understand a word you said. That's, Rabbi, there's a conundrum here. There's a nice word that people like to use, attention. That's why we titled this, what are we? Are we this or are we that? Well, I think the answer is we're both. So the question is, how do we learn to navigate between these two? I always thought that, we talk about Abraham, the first Jew. We proclaim him that. It's never written anywhere like that, but I always thought it was odd. Everybody thinks it's odd that we read the Akedah.
Say that again. Sorry.
We read the Akedah, the binding of Isaac on Rosh Hashanah. The Torah portion, when it appears during the weekly reading, has another major story. And that story is Sodom and Gomorrah. is it the same Abraham in both stories? One, God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they really annoy me. What does Abraham do? He stands up and approaches God. Already, you have a revolution right there. And he says, you can't do that. He tells God that's immoral. And then you have the other story. Go sacrifice your son. Okay, boss. He wakes up early in the morning because he's excited to. How did Abraham know when to submit and when to stand up? That to me is the conundrum that we kind of wrestle with on Yom Kippur, on the holidays. So let me just conclude. I'll just say this, and then we'll see if there are any other comments. We have this tension, as you describe it, between these two impulses. Judaism is about empowering us. We interpret the text. That's our responsibility. We make these decisions. We're in control. We're independent. We're liberated. And at the same time, it's about God, accepting God's kingdom, letting go, surrendering, and not being in control. So the High Holy Days are about remembering our power and independence from God and surrendering to God. Any comments about that? Any reactions, comments?
I'm just wondering if there's any like tools or guidance that's given towards when are we to determine when we should make these decisions and when we need to like relinquish our control and ultimately listen to God. So I'm curious if there's any, I don't know.
I don't know of any quick and easy answers to that, because I've tried to present it as the conundrum that we're supposed to kind of try to wrestle with. I imagine that, if you think about it on a personal level, there can be a question of your health. My mother-in-law was in a declining state with dementia for a few years, and then health. And God willing, thank God she lived to 95 and a half. But at that point, her body just started shutting down, one system after another. So it happens that her primary caregiver was our brother-in-law. And we were trying to balance, in some sense, this tension. When do we submit? When do we say? By the way, if you want to hear an incredible sermon, look up Ikar, Rabbi Brause's Rosh Hashanah morning service, when she talks about her father's death. And the whole thing was about providing compassionate death, not prolonging life to prolong death, but rather providing a compassionate death. It's a very beautiful sermon. But it's a way, it's one maybe small example of negotiating this. We have medicine, we have power, God wants us to cure, but when do we submit? When do we give? Maybe I picked that example because it's somewhat easy to describe. The rest of it, I'll leave up to you. You have all the rest of the day on Yom Kippur to figure out.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
you, Rabbi. There's another class in here now, isn't there?
Yeah, Rabbi, yeah.
It starts right now, or is there a?